Welcome to the Dunk City Podcast.
Change direction by Matthews for the pass and final play. Ellis hits it. Corky Ellis has been the show. It is on the Trojan Tundra. USC is on to the Sweet 16.
Okay, welcome back to the Dunk City Podcast, brought to you by USCBasketball.com. I'm your co-host, Chris Houston, with my co-host, Mark Backstrom. USC, for the first time in it seems like ages, is coming off a victory. The Trojans beat Oregon State on Saturday, 82-54 in Galen. It was an all-around team effort. This came on the heels of a sixth straight loss on February 1st, Thursday, against Oregon, which was just a 9-point loss, and a little bit of a, there's no such thing as moral victories, but maybe given what happened against Oregon State, you can sort of see a little bit of the corner turning there. And then next week, or I should say coming up on Wednesday, USC will travel up to the Bay and take on California. That is at 8 p.m. up at Haas Pavilion, and that will be on the Pac-12 Network. And then on Saturday at Stanford at 7 p.m., that will be on ESPNU, which means, Mark, that I don't think there will be any Bill Walton.
I don't know. He might be on that ESPN broadcast. We'll see. That means you might be able to listen, though, huh? Not just a video only.
Maybe. I mean, you never know who they dredge up.
Yeah. Actually, I think ESPN usually has like an Adrian Branch or the Corey gentleman that played at Arizona in the 90s, I believe.
Oh yeah, he's not bad. Is it Corey Simon?
No, you're thinking of Miles Simon. It's Corey.
Miles Simon. Oh yeah,
he wears a bow tie.
Yeah, I remember him now. I can't remember what his name was.
He's good and he's insightful and he gets excited, but not at crazy things like Mr. Walton does.
Before I forget, I want to talk about the broadcaster who I do think is maybe the most talented young broadcaster I've heard in a while, and that is Ernie Kent's son, Jordan Kent, who is a fantastic play-by-play guy, and because he has a basketball background, he's potentially also someone who could really ask good questions of his color analyst and who maybe chip in as a color guy himself. I mean, theoretically, he can do the whole game without any help.
Maybe like a 2020s version of Chick Hearn, but a little more polished. What a voice that guy has too, huh?
Got a great voice. He is incredible with the speed of his calls, and it's interesting because most of the time athletes take a while before they go and become color analysts, or they start out as color analysts and they're usually not very good at first. I don't know a whole lot about Jordan Kent's background, but he must have majored in communications or broadcast journalism because he sounds so polished, and he goes right into the play-by-play role instead of the color analyst. So very impressive talent in that world. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about this 82-54 win and a little bit about the loss to Oregon, which was 78-69.
Let's get into it. Go.
So the thing that really struck me about the Oregon game was the first half, when everything you wrote in your most recent column, I should say the column before this last one, talking about spurts of death. It happened almost on schedule. Yes. Because USC played very well, I think, for the first 16, 17 minutes of the first half. And then Oregon went on a run. And it was like they went into the halftime with a nice cushion. And they just kept USC never closer than 7 points the rest of the way.
Yeah. You could almost just feel it coming, couldn't you, as well? Man, yeah.
Yeah, maybe the players could feel it coming because it's almost like they willed it into existence.
Yeah,
but that Oregon game was interesting for a few things, for a few reasons. One, Arrington Page got his second start of the season. Mm-hmm. It was the first kind of major shakeup in the starting lineup in a while. So you saw Arrington Page starting in place of DJ Rodman, and you saw Osiah Sellers, who had been starting recently, but he firmly is in the starting lineup now. And he came through with one of his finest games as far as just shooting efficiency and whatnot. And then you had Kobe Johnson starting what might be his last starting game at USC, or this season anyway, and he went 1 for 9 and 0 for 6 from the 3-point range. And this was seemingly the final straw for Andy Enfield, and he just had to make a change, and that's what we saw going into Oregon State. But tell me your thoughts on Oregon, Mark.
Yeah, a little closer than a 9-point final margin might indicate. The BPO 100, just a difference of 52.8 to 51.1, which feels a little closer than a 3+ possession game.
Yeah.
Even though it was a frustrating loss and the opponent BPO is just too high, aside from what you mentioned, other good performances that gave glimmers of hope. DJ Rodman had a BPO 100 of 66.7. Bronny James 74. And in just 15 minutes, unfortunately. I think we'll have to come back to this about Vince's minutes, but Vince had a BPO of exactly 100, which is second this season, only that crazy Isaiah game.
Wow.
That we saw recently. Yeah. I'm not getting to get into this a little bit. Vince was kind of singled out post Oregon game in the presser by Enfield for not rebounding. And he must be just, and maybe I got to pay attention to this. He must be a detrimental at not blocking out, because he got 10.7 rebounds per 40 against Oregon. I know that's not the be all end all stat, but he's been consistently really good on the boards. Like I said, maybe he's just letting, he's just grabbing because he's so big, but he's just not boxing out and letting others get rebounds at I don't know. I don't know how to put the thought together.
Right.
Doesn't make sense.
I think 10.7 rebounds per 40 is a good, obviously a great efficiency number, but obviously there are times when people who really do average 11 rebounds per game in a season, perhaps, are going to have games where their per 40 rebounding is ridiculous, right?
Sure.
So I think that they're looking for a few more of those types of games from Vince, right? So we'd like a little more volume rebounding, and I think it's also just it's not just if you can get the rebound or if Vince can get the rebound. It's also he has to body his man so a teammate can get the rebound. A lot of times that's a big part of it as well. So for me, it's like if I'm watching the game and I see Vince not get the rebound, but I see that he tipped the ball out or he contributed to the rebound, then that's all good. But yeah, I think it was good that Andy called people out a bit, because God knows he's given everybody a fair shot. Yeah. I think I don't think there's anybody in the roster who can say, "Oh, I should have played more. If only I had played more than this." Right? There's nobody. Everyone has gotten their shot. I mean, maybe the only person who could make some kind of complaint about that, or maybe it was Sellers, maybe Kijani, but I think until recently, Kijani just hasn't been able to be consistent. And Isaiah, to be fair, hadn't been able to really show what he can do. Now, to kind of justify Enfield, his recent explosion or his recent improvement, his recent showing of confidence has resulted in more minutes. So I think it's a pretty simple equation here. If you go out on the floor and you produce, you're going to play. And maybe to the team's detriment, he will, if you prove yourself, he will let you keep playing so that you can get out of that. If you're not playing well, he'll let you play until you can get out of it. And I think he let Kobe go as far as he can take it. Yeah. Right? But Kobe, again, 2 of 15 in his last 4 from 3-point. Right? And just if you're not, and he wasn't playing good defense. So if you're not playing good defense and you're not shooting well, then what are you bringing to the table? And I think we've been talking about the need to bench Kobe, not in like a punitive fashion, but just, hey, take a step back, watch the game for a while. Obviously he puts a lot of pressure on himself. I think he really wanted to get to the league this year, and so he really needed to show his offense. And then mentally, when things went down, it was hard for him to crawl back. So, but I think that Enfield has done a good job of managing minutes or opportunities, at least, for the team this year.
Agree. Agree. It had to be done, and I hate to say that, and that I'm kind of wondering now. Does that mean that are we past the "this is Kobe's team" phase of this season?
Well, that's the thing. If the team is going to do anything this year, then the team must be pried from Kobe's dead cold hands. Sorry to use that analogy, but no, he can't be the guy anymore. He can't be the guy he isn't the guy. He has ceded that role as being sort of the alpha male of the team, the face of the team. And I know there's great players in Boogie and Isaiah Collier, but Kobe Johnson was sort of like the engine of the team, as we talked about. So so we've taken the engine out, and right now we're sort of we're running on solar. So we don't have a combustion engine. We're just kind of floating around. We got solar sails, but So I think that it had to be done because you don't want to do it at the start of next year, right? No. And I think one of the benefits of it's like a stupid silver lining, right? But one of the silver linings of a team having a rotten year is that you can do this kind of thing, right? Kobe Johnson can't say, "Oh, coach, man, what the heck? What I should be like." He can't be sitting on the bench feeling like he should be playing. Do you know what I mean? Because when you go 2 for your last, when you're shooting 36% and 26% from three, and not playing good defense, when you're not playing very well, and you're given the chance over and over and over again to revive yourself, and you don't do it, then what ground do you have to stand on? I just don't think maybe when the season's over, he might think, well, maybe if I would have had a better season if coach had done this, but he can't say coach never gave me a shot. So I think, and same with DJ Rodman, right? So he didn't start again, and he played better, right? But it's like none of these guys who are being sort of like given a back seat to the rest of the team as far as minutes go have any reason to feel resentment about it. Like they can look in the mirror and say, yeah, this was on me. So that's kind of one of the benefits to having a really rotten season is that you can finally make you might be able to make personnel changes in lineups and in playing time in ways you couldn't if the team was doing really well.
Yeah.
Right. So it's if USC was 18-2 or whatever the tally is, and Kobe Johnson was having a really was shooting 35%, and just somehow they had done it with him playing poorly. You don't change him in the lineup necessarily because maybe you like what the chemistry you have or something, right? Or maybe you don't want to create resentment. So when you're crappy, you can do some of these things.
Or as somebody wrote last week, it's only when you lost everything that you're free to do anything.
So wise. So Oregon, USC definitely showed some things in that game, but to me it was just like it was like they didn't know how to win, and it sounds. I'm like a huge hater of those types of cliches in sports, but it was like they're going through the motions, and they just sort of like were spinning their wheels, and Oregon just kind of like. I feel like the USC was so detached from the game that they just couldn't kind of grab onto Oregon. And so, but I feel like they got a taste of it, and maybe that's why they thought, okay, maybe we can finally get over the hump against Oregon State.
Yeah, the Oregon game was let's put it this way. The Oregon game, if this is a word, seemed very microcosmic of the season to date.
Mm-hmm.
And looking forward to the next game, maybe the Oregon State game was a little foreboding and microcosmic what's to come.
Yeah, I think foreboding is maybe not the right word. Maybe foreshadowing.
There you go.
Let's go with foreshadowing.
Yeah. Well, I'm a CPA, not a
it's okay.
English major.
It's okay. So there's some people on the message boards who are talking about that we shouldn't get too excited about this game, and I'm definitely not crowing about it for sure. But I don't think there's too many 30-point victories for USC basketball in conference play, even with these really good teams we've had in recent years, right? I know there have been like some 20-point blowouts. I know this is 28 technically, but I don't think I've seen a USC team dominate a team in the conference in quite a while like this. So it was kind of nice to see. And again, let's not forget this Oregon State team did beat Arizona. They're the 11th place team, but I don't think they're very bad. I think they're a dangerous team.
In fairness, they're not the same on the road versus home. They have
Yeah.
pretty violent splits.
Yeah.
To the fairness of those on the boards that are making that point.
Right.
But having said that, winning that game by that margin is what basically the best teams in the conference will do.
Right. It's not really something you want to set your clock to. It's not something you should expect. You don't really want to think that this is going to happen every time, and it almost certainly will not happen every time. But
Yeah.
can it foreshadow some success in the future? I think it's certainly possible. We saw some player combinations that we're going to see a lot more of going forward, and we're going to see a lot more of probably next year. And I think one of the cool things about the game was that there were 3 players I thought who really stood out. Obviously, Sellers, he's now 5 of his last 6 in double figures. He had 12 points in that game. He's averaging 11.5 in his last 6. He's shooting 52% field goals, 66% three-point on 25 minutes a game during these last 6 games. So he is right now the most confident USC player on the roster. He's really he's just kind of working like a chef out there, just really kind of being very deliberate. I don't get the sense that he's ever in a super hurry. He has really kind of like conservative shot selection. I've complained about this. But I'm curious if he shot more than 6 or 7 times a game, if he upped that to 11 or 12, how his efficiency would look. But he's definitely a player we're going to see a lot more of this year and next year. And then Kijani Wright had probably his best game as a Trojan against Oregon State, 12 points, 5 boards. He's averaging 7.5 points in his last 4, along with 4 rebounds, shooting 57%. And then Arrington Page, if you combine the Oregon State game together, he played 29 minutes combined against those schools. And in those 29 minutes, 10 points, 5 boards, 3 assists, 5 blocks.
Wow. That's a super sub right there, man. I know he's starting, but man, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, he fouled out in 10 minutes against Oregon State. A lot of those fouls were just really bad calls, but you're going to see a lot of that happen with young bigs. But he's really showing, and to that end, talking about these young guys, it's really good to see the animation of the bench in that game and just them having a good time. You didn't see people sulking, which you worry is going to happen when you have a team that's having a bad year.
Are you saying that maybe some people might have given up on the season? Kind of like we see on the boards? That would be the inclination, to your point, that you would just see like, God, let's get this over with. But man, they were like seriously engaged.
Yeah.
It was fun. I was happy for them.
Fight on is considered a suggestion, not a command, So it's interesting that it's like a turning of the page, so to speak. Sellers, Kijani, Page, and you see like the 3 guys who played the most in the last couple of years, Kobe and Boogie and Morgan. Now Morgan, not so much as the other 2, but Kobe and Boogie Kobe's obviously had a huge fall off this year, but Boogie has fallen off a lot too. His last 4, he's averaging 12.2. He's shooting 32.6 from the field. Still shooting pretty good from 3-point land, but he's not. It could be that he's just at this point. He's now been hurt twice this year.
Yeah,
and it could just be, Mother Nature and the bumps and bruises have taken their toll, and he's just not the same guy. It's kind of interesting not to see him not be the focus of the game and to see other players step up.
Yeah, what's interesting about Boogie too, even though he had a poor shooting night, but you have 3 assists as a positive, and you have no turnovers to really drag down your numbers.
Mm-hmm.
His BPO 100 for the game was 60, which is actually above his total for last season. So even if you're not shooting well, if you just don't turn the ball over a lot and you just help out a couple times, you're still a serious, seriously additive to the team.
No, absolutely. Because here's the thing, Boogie is fine as a role player too. He's only shooting 12. He's only scoring 12.2 points per game the last 4, but he's still averaging 17 on the year, right? So, but as long as he's not scoring 3 or 5, right, then you can get by with him scoring 12 for a few games. So he's not like hurting the team in that regard.
And credit to Don McLean for pointing out. I don't know if you caught this kind of later in the broadcast. He said he's impressed that Boogie just wasn't trying to get cheap points, as the game wore on and it was getting more out of control.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, he said that actually he thinks that plays well with the scouts too, because the scouts pick up on that.
Right.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. So nice to get that winning streak or the losing streak snapped. USC is now 9-13 on the season, and 3-8 in Pac-12 play. I think USC is now tied with Oregon State for last place in the conference, but it's better than being last in the conference by yourself.
Yes.
The Trojans will take on Cal and Stanford coming up this week. Now that we've talked about Oregon State, I want to go into our next segment called Game Theory, in which you come up with a theory about this game.
Yeah. This game, the Oregon game specifically, with how engaged the team was, and nobody wants to hear a CPA just read off numbers on a podcast.
I do.
Look at my column. Okay. Wow. All right. By popular demand, BPO for the last 3 games. Now there is a lot made during the Oregon State broadcast about how that was our 3rd game that we were holding opponents under 40%. But there's other parts of that too. It's, I've made this point a couple times, especially when it comes to 3-point opponents shooting 3-pointers. You have to defend without fouling, and you have to turn your opponent over. So even though we held UCLA to 35% in that home game, their BPO was still 50.7. Oregon, they shot 36.9%, but they didn't really turn the ball over. They got to the line a lot, and so their BPO was 52.8%.
Yeah.
Oregon State, that the field goal percentage was in line, about 35%, but they got to the line fewer times. We turned them out a lot. We turned them over a lot more, 14.5% versus the prior 2 averaged about it looks like 7%. So we doubled the turnover percentage defensively. So that resulted in driving Oregon State's BPO 100 down to under 40, which is that's elite. That's kind of like we were hoping to see at our best coming into the season.
Well, that's interesting because what you're saying here, the numbers you're describing are very much like what you just talked about with Boogie Ellis, where even if you shoot a low field goal percentage, if you don't turn the ball over a lot, it really helps you. And these are just great numbers. And I want to say that for those of you listening, you should go to uscbasketball.com and go to the Buck Metrics page. Mark has a couple categories which he follows, or I should say he ranks the players with these scores, and you can go into further detail on the website. But it's turned out you really you can't necessarily predict specific things, but you can really see trends. You can really see they tend to be. I mean, I shouldn't say that. They've been pretty descriptive, I should say, of what teams are doing. So everyone should check that out. Those the Buck Metrics tab on uscbasketball.com. Continue, please, Mark.
Yeah. So, even though the field goal percentage was nice in that 3-game streak, but the defensive effort was just better and more all-encompassing in the Oregon State game. You pair that up with Kobe coming off the bench in that game for the first time this season. My theory is, and obviously I'm curious your take on this, maybe the team was too deferential to Kobe and Josh, obviously, since he's a great shot blocker, defensively. And they just kind of figured, all right, Kobe's starting. He's just kind of got a defensive end, and we can maybe just kind of, give it an effort, but not the effort, capital T, capital E. And maybe with him on the bench, there was just a more sense of an urgency to play just more engaged defense, because that's what we got, and that's what we hadn't seen since about the Seton Hall game.
Yeah. No, I think that I would say I would mostly agree with that. I think that it's potentially Kobe is maybe he's a better off-ball defender than he is a ball defender, on-ball defender. So I think that he plays better team defense than he does individual defense. if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he's good at coming in the double team, getting his hands in the lane, anticipating passes and stuff like that. But when he's up on a guy, he's not really like as elite as he is in the other facet. And
he's not a shut you down like Stace Bozeman not allowing Jason Kidd to bring up the ball kind of defender.
Yeah, no, exactly, precisely. I'm Stace Bozeman. I'll take that, please. Thank you. I think that so when Kobe plays not so good in his defense, which is mostly team defense, it's more likely to affect the team because he's not closing out on players, or he's not switching fast enough, or he's not getting back on runouts and whatnot. So I think that it's the type of defender that he is that makes him especially detrimental when he's not playing good defense. And also, like you said, they rely on him to sort of be this the engine of that defense and to spark them. And so perhaps they're just so used to Kobe doing that they just sort of, like you said, they deferred to him.
Yeah. And as I flesh that out a little bit too, just if I'm not an awesome defender, but I have Kobe as a helper and I have Josh as a rim protector.
Yeah.
How hard do I really have to try?
Maybe you think that. Maybe you're used to seeing this in practice, and you're used to struggling against it in practice, and then you get to the games, you're like, oh, they're going to struggle against it too. And so maybe they do something completely different, and you're just not ready for it. Now that's just, I don't think any of these things are conscious, but I can definitely see this sort of when the game is like, the 37th minute and you're really tired, you played a lot of minutes and you're digging down to stop a team on a possession, and you're hoping that Kobe will defend his guy, or so that you don't have to defend yours, that kind of thing. It could be something like that, and because Kobe's not playing at the level that he's used to, we're seeing a larger breakdowns. And I think to some extent, it's similar to Josh as well, because he's again leading the Pac-12 in block shots. But I think his man-to-man, or his post defense outside of the rim protection, it has been, I don't think, as good as it was last year. So he seems to have regressed a little bit from last year in that regard. I thought he had really good stretches of defensive, guarding players last year, and he was put on the All Pac-12 defensive team. I don't think not only for his blocks. I think he was also a good post defender, a low post defender. So yeah, I think to some extent you're right, because when you depend on those types of players to sort of carry you on defense, when they don't come through, on the nights they don't come through, your defense is going to suffer a lot.
Yeah, for games at a time, basically, it seemed like. Yeah,
it really did seem like that. Okay, so that was your game theory. I think it's a pretty good theory. Now we're going to go to our next segment, which is question time. Just like the House of Lords or the House of Parliament with the British Prime Minister, I will now stand up, and the opposing party will now regale me with queries.
All right, Mr. Prime Minister.
Yes.
I have 3 questions for you.
Go on.
The first question is, you might have seen in my column this week that USC had superior ball movement against Oregon State. Let me pull up the numbers here, Mr. Prime Minister. USC had 22 assists on 30 made baskets, Mr. Prime Minister, creating a lot of easy looks, making 65.8% of 2-point attempts. Mr. Prime Minister, once Isaiah Collier comes back, will the pieces fit? Will we have the same ball movement, or will we get bogged down?
I think they will. I think the pieces will fit. because I think we know a lot more about a lot more of the team, right, than we did when Collier was starting. We know that Isaiah Sellers is now a confident, young, blossoming player. We know what we had with Bronny James. We know he's going through some struggles shooting, but we know that, gosh, he's a really good passer, and he's actually facilitating a lot lately. He's 13 assists in the last 2 games, and he's had a couple other games where he's had 5 or 6 assists, and not necessarily in 40 minutes or nothing like that. You've got Arrington Page, who I think is starting to show signs of ascensions, and Kijani Wright and Vincent Iwuchukwu, who are much more developed than they were early in the season. And look at Kijani. It's like he had a turnaround jumper in this game against Oregon State. He showed some things, like it's almost like it was almost all confidence related with him, and the worry that on a team with so many big scorers that the pressure was on to not screw things up by trying to score. And it turns out he's got a pretty decent low post game. It's there. He just doesn't get a chance to use it much. But with Oregon, he was great. At Oregon State, we're up 20 or whatever. Hey, he's going to try a couple of these shots, and they went in. He was 5 of 6 in the game. Also have 5 boards and some blocked shots. He played really good defense. So we now know what we have with a few more of these guys, and they're trending. They tend to be trending upward, and the veterans are trending downward, but the young guys are trending upward. So I think if Isaiah Collier comes back, he's been watching this whole time, right? He's hungry to play. He's looking at the situation. He's like, okay, great. I've got Isaiah. If I get tired, Bronny can come and spell me for a few minutes. Arrington is starting to come along. I could start to, I now know that I can trust him a little more. Kijani Wright looks like I can trust him a little more. Vince is, starting to be more trustworthy. So I think that with Isaiah, he's less of a kind of a priority right now because the team is a little bit more developed, like up and down the roster, than it was early in the year. Early in the year, it was basically these 3 superstar guards and the road crew, kind of thing. It was Peter, Paul, and Mary, and then the backup singers and the roadies. So Peter, Paul, and Mary, for you young kids out there, was a 1960s folk group best known for their song "Puff the Magic Dragon." Anyway, so yeah, I think Isaiah comes back, and I'm not saying it's going to be puppy dogs and ice cream, but I do think that that there's a chance for the team to go on a nice little run in that conference tournament. That's got to be what they're telling the players. Hey, the season's been very disappointing, but it's not over. We've got a shot to let's get better, so that when we hit that conference tournament, we've got a real shot. And that's I think that's a real tangible goal for the team to shoot towards.
Well,
Next question.
I agree, and I share your optimism.
Yeah.
The only thing is, as I pointed out in my column about the Bronny coaster, now he's got more experience at this level than Bronny does.
Mm-hmm.
You're still going to have those ups and downs. So
yeah.
I don't know. With 2 freshmen handling the ball, that could get really interesting. But for the most part, I agree with you.
Well, to be clear, I'm not saying I don't think if USC doesn't do well with Collier in the lineup, I don't think it's necessarily because that he upset the apple cart. You know what I mean? Because this would imply that this would imply that the lineup that he's entering will have been doing really well. Right. Like, I don't know if the team's I don't know if they're going to do well the rest of the year. I don't necessarily think that USC is about to go on a tear. So if USC is sort of limps to the finish line, like, and kind of, let's say they got 9 games left, I think. Let's say they win. Well, let's be generous. Say they go 5-4. Right. Then it's not like you're really upsetting much by bringing, you're not risking anything. Right. Now, if they would go 9-0, then you might be like, oh, then right, maybe we have to worry about what Collier will do because this team's playing so well as is.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely something to keep an eye on, though. I'm very interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious to see when he actually comes back. I think that we had I think February 15th versus Utah seems to be a possibility.
Yeah.
I haven't heard any buzz about him starting. I think that they said 4 to 6 weeks, and he got hurt against Washington State, which was January 10th. So February 10th is the Stanford game. So in theory, at the earliest, he could come back against Stanford. Indeed, Enfield said on Monday that it's possible that Isaiah could come back this weekend, and if not this weekend, probably next week.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anywho, all right. So, do you have any more questions for the Prime Minister?
Question number 2 of 3, Mr. Prime Minister. So, I made what, looking back now, was a brilliant point when I compared this team to a racehorse named Obviously, who, if you didn't read the column, dear listener, would make a living out of just running out to huge leads and then desperately hanging on at the end. And if Obviously ever got looked in the eye, he would just kind of fade to 4th or 5th place. So was the Oregon State game, was this only just that big wire-to-wire win by Obviously? Is this team capable of getting looked in the eye and coming back? Or is that to be determined?
To be determined, I think.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Easy. I can't disagree with that. Yeah. I guess that's the one thing, just to put a little perspective on that. To maybe just decide a little bit with the haters on the message board.
Yeah, they hate us because they ain't us.
Yeah.
No, I think that there's a long way to go, and I think it's all to be determined at this point.
Okay. Third question of 3.
Okay.
The effort was clearly there against Oregon State. We don't know, was it precipitated specifically by having Kobe not start? Was it basically the blossoming of maybe now super sub DJ Rodman? But the performance was there literally across all five positions for the whole game there. My question is, when things aren't so rosy, does USC now have the on-court presence to keep others accountable, as that was one of the problems that we had?
I think so. I mean, at this point, I don't think you can get any worse. Right? So I think we're going to find out very quickly if this lineup that we've been fielding in this homestand is going to carry over to this coming weekend with Cal and Stanford. So I think that it's almost like a beginning. It's like the second season has begun. The first sort of main rotation or main group of starters, they pretty much had their run in the first half, and it was a disaster. And I think Andy's like, okay, that core group of players, Boogie, Collier, Kobe, Rodman, Morgan, these guys are had their go. And I'm not saying, like, obviously Collier he doesn't have because of injury, but I think he's like, look, I've got to do something. I just can't keep playing these guys and having the same result. So I think that the leadership will come as these guys get the chance to show what they can do. And I think there's other guys who are potential leaders on that team. I mean, I don't know what the interior of that team is like, but I feel like people lead by example a little bit on that second group of players like Kajani Wright and Ozai Sellers. I feel like they may not be the most vocal guys, but maybe maybe we don't need vocal guys. Maybe we need just passionless, but efficient, and passionless but efficient and calculating basketball players. I mean, I don't know. It's just
there's a team of actuaries, if you will.
Yes, exactly. There's so many ways for a roster to be constructed, and some teams have fully like a very emotional rosters, and some teams the players never crack a smile. So,
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I need to see it. Going back to horse racing, one of my passions too. Some horses are called bicycle horses because the jockey can't just sit and push him at the end. They have to like ride him like a bicycle out of the gate. And this team kind of feels to me like a bicycle team, where basically, except until the Oregon State game, and maybe until the Oregon State game from maybe the end of the Seton Hall game, they seemed to be a bicycle team where they just had to be, on top of by the coaches, or else it would slip. It just felt like that. So into that void, I don't know who goes. But to your point, maybe the team of actuaries can get it done without that on court presence, just if it's a different group of actuaries.
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the thing is, you can't have all hotheads. And you can't have all actuaries, right? You got to have. You can get away with, having one or two on, kind of balance it out, right? So it's all about the balance.
Yeah, fair. Just not that he's a USC player, but I'm to kind of test this theory a little bit. I'm guessing you, like me, would not put Kirk Risa, late of Arizona, in the actuary column. Is that a fair statement?
That was
okay.
Very fair. Yeah, very fair. Most of the I'd say under Enfield, USC's had a good mix of hotheads and cold-blooded types.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
There, and I think so, for example, Nick Rakocevic, right?
Yep.
Would be the extreme hothead level player, but then you have Jordan McLaughlin and Jonah Matthews kind of guys, right?
Yeah.
And D'Anthony Melton, very reserved. Just go out, do your job, do it great. It's not saying they don't show any emotion, but that's not what they're not. They don't need the emotion to pump themselves up, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, it's funny because Enfield did mention Rakocevic in that post Oregon game presser, and he also mentioned Chavez Goodwin.
Yeah.
Another guy. I wouldn't call him. Well, don't know about a hothead, but yeah, very emotional. Like bring everybody up kind of guy. I mean, nobody's in Nick's class when it comes to that. He's just a different kind of animal.
Yeah, and it's funny when you think about watching this team on television, and and I see them on social media, and I kind of have like a guess as to what these guys are like. Mm-hmm. And over the years, Enfield's teams have tended to be, above all, pretty laid back.
Yeah,
like they've all been I feel like they've all been pretty, like, they like to have fun and kind of be silly. But they're very laid back. And to me, like Dennis Rodman or DJ Rodman, is his tone and the vibes he carries is very laid back, right? It's definitely very like Orange County Beach, Laguna Beach style vibes with DJ Rodman. So I don't know if that's kind of like, for some reason, like the vibe that has sort of taken over the team. The level of intensity, especially on defense, not being there. Maybe this is kind of maybe this is one reason for it. Just like the good time vibe.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. Maybe he's been the secret tone setter because he just got after it over the weekend on the boards, and he was just a different, not just a different level of play, but almost like a different style of play.
Yeah.
And like just doing a lot of the dirty work that his dad used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of expected before I first saw him play, in Pullman, and it's been a Dennis Rodman tribute act over the last couple games.
Yeah. I mean, some of this is a product of competition and situations, but it really shows that he's someone who, I don't know if he's a self-motivator or, someone needs to motivate him from externally. But he's definitely a guy that shows he can do things if he really, really pushes himself. So you just hope that guys can keep pushing themselves more than they have been. So
yeah.
Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
That's it for our question time. now we're going to do our Mark's Mean Minute. Take it away.
All right. This might just sound like old man yelling at the clouds thing, but bear with me, folks. It'll be a little bit of a tie eventually to hoops here. If you ran a shop, Chris, and you charged $8 for a little Ziploc bag of Oreo cookies and $5 for a small bottle of Dasani water, you would have to be making a real serious profit, wouldn't you?
I think I'd probably be at an airport, but go ahead.
Well, yes, you would. And if you had that kind of margin, wouldn't you think you'd be able to pay to have those self-checkout machines work?
Yes. Seems
Yeah,
like it.
but no. Yeah, who could not make that happen? Our friends at Harry Reid Airport. Good job, guys. It's amazing. All that margin, and you have one long line with some overwhelmed lady having to take everybody's credit card because your self-checkout things are both broken because $8 is not enough for a little zip bag of Oreo cookies. Really good job.
Don't you have to just pull the arm on the side and the Oreos come out?
Yeah, no, not at the end of the trip. At the end of the trip, you don't want to do that anymore. You're just looking for something to get in your stomach and get on the plane.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think the problem was the Oreos in the beginning. I think somebody was telling you that you shouldn't be eating those Oreos.
Maybe that was it. Yeah, it was a sign from the nutrition gods. Just don't do it.
It's
just wait till you get on the plane.
It's funny. I hadn't thought I hadn't read about it recently, but I did hear one time that there's like some weird regulation that accounts for the prices in airports. Like something to do with the bidding that takes place in order to get a space at the airport. Something along those lines.
And like maybe guaranteeing like certain levels of pay.
That, or kind of like because it's so competitive, the bid, like the costs are higher to get in.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there's that may not be exactly it, but I remember reading about it, and it doesn't make it any better, but it did make a little more sense as to why. I think the one that really doesn't make any sense is movie theaters.
Yeah, well, that's just pure
larceny.
Yeah. Just a quick point, then we'll get out of the weeds of the travel hour here. Portland International, awesome airport. They actually have I guess it's a city ordinance that if you are going to have a restaurant at the airport, it has to be the same prices as your regular restaurant in the city.
Wow.
So you don't have like a California pizza kitchen that costs, charges you $30 for a little one-person pizza.
Wow.
And it's the same quality. It's awesome. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. It's so funny because airports make me so hungry. I just get so hungry. Airports and hospitals. I walk into a hospital. I'm like, where's the cafeteria?
Oh, man.
Something about cafeteria.
Poor guy.
Something about cafeteria fries. It's very comforting. And then
okay.
Yeah, and then airports. Well, it's like I feel like I should. It's like if you're not sitting down, having something to eat and watching people at the airport, then it just feels like
well, you're just missing out, basically.
Wasted the trip. So
it's yeah, that's how I felt. That's why I got the Oreos. I could not have the Oreos and people watch it. The whole trip would have been shot.
Makes total sense to me.
So equally as inept in terms of creating margin into properly functioning checkout machines would be. Don't know who said this, so I won't personally name and shame the person, but I'll just say the same level of understanding, comprehension. I know ineptitude is a word. I don't know if aptitude is a word.
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 100, what do you think would be the likelihood of the Boston Celtics general manager wanting to coach at the University of Southern California?
The Boston Celtics general manager?
Yes, also known as Brad Stevens.
Oh, Brad Stevens. He's not the coach anymore then?
No, he's a GM.
Okay, that shows you how much I follow the NBA. What are the odds?
The chance, scale of 1 to 100. What's the likelihood that he would say, "Yeah, I'm fine here. This is not for me. I'd rather coach at USC than be the general manager of I guess like one of the top 5 teams in the NBA." Sounds like you're leaning towards 98, 99.
Well, first of all, how much is he making? $10 million a year.
He makes a lot of money, yeah, as a GM. I think it's like in in the high what would that be? The high 7 digits.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I would say under 5%.
Okay.
I mean, it's like, there are scenarios which you could rationalize why he might do it. Desire to get back into coaching plus, huge payday plus blah blah blah, right? But it's just, I feel like if he's going to get back into college, he doesn't want to go somewhere and not, it's not like USC needs to be built, but if he wants to win national titles in college basketball, then he's going to go somewhere where he's a lot closer to a national title than USC is.
Yeah.
But tell me what was behind this.
Oh, just I was catching up on the boards, and when the people are saying, well, let's fire this guy. Well, tell me who would be better. And one gentleman said, well, Brad Stevens, for example.
Why not Red Auerbach?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's I don't think he's available.
He's under contract. That's right.
Yes.
No, I saw some of those threads, and some of them are pretty funny. The names that some people have brought forth. There was one. Okay, so yeah, Brad Stevens, Tommy Lloyd, right? Tommy Lloyd's going to leave Arizona, come to USC. Jay Wright. I mean, you just have to like Jay Wright. Okay, now then it gets really funny. Penny Hardaway. Penny Hardaway is not a good coach. Sean Miller. Like, if Sean Miller can't get it done at Arizona, and by get it done I mean live up to what Arizona should be able to do, then not Arizona. Jerome Tang, would be good, but it's not like, he's like this top 5 coach in college basketball or some kind of guy who's going to get you, who's going to get you, you get him and you'll be like, oh yeah, we're going to the, we're going to go to the Final Four with this guy. We know it, And
he has a resume of like 50 games as a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, Porter Moser, right? I mean, some of these suggestions. It's like, look, some of these guys. I'm not arguing that some of these guys aren't better basketball coaches than Andy Enfield, okay? But there are all kinds of things that go into firing a coach, right? That people just you have to look at the aggregate sort of outcome that you're facing. It's not just as simple as, this coach is gone, a new coach is coming in, right? You've got a situation of new coach is gone, you lose your recruiting class probably, right? You lose guys, you're probably going to be really bad right away, and you have to rebuild everything, right? And you've got sort of the controversy that this creates. You've got the media buzz about, why did they fire this guy to bring in this guy who's not much better, right? It's like, if you're going to fire Andy Enfield and bring in someone who is like just marginally better, or Kyle Smith, who's a good coach, but like, if you're going to like tear down what Andy Enfield did in 11 seasons after a really bad season to get Kyle Smith, or Porter Moser.
Yeah.
It's like if when someone gets stabbed, when you stab someone and you pull out the knife, that's when you start bleeding. It's like you got to figure out, if the knife's in, you can't just like pull the knife out. You got to be very careful how you do it. And if you start bleeding, you better have something to stop the bleeding. And so it's like there are no coaches that exist out there who you look at them and say, yeah, USC is going to go to a Final Four with this guy for sure, right? Because there's very few coaches who are currently coaching who've been to a Final Four, and it's just like I'm not saying that Andy Enfield's perfect, or that there might not be a legitimate case to replace him with someone. I'm just saying that if you're going to replace him with someone, it really should be like a high level. Higher than Porter Moser or Kyle Smith or Jerome Tang.
Yep.
Get
and if you think Brad Stevens is available, then just remove yourself from that discussion, because you're not helping.
Yeah. I mean, Beard from Mississippi. He's a great coach.
Oh, man.
He's a great coach,
Yeah.
but you can't you can't get him.
No.
Right? You can't get Chris Beard because he's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you can't get Kelvin Sampson when you're USC. You can't hire Kelvin Sampson because he's had problems. Right? So, there's a bunch of really good coaches who, if they were at USC, I would say, if Kelvin Sampson was at USC or if Chris Beard was at USC, I'd be like, oh, yeah, we're going to the Final Four, quick,
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt. These guys are better coaches than Andy Enfield. They're better coaches than they might be the two best coaches in the country. Right? But it's we're not going to get them because they have checkered pasts.
Mm-hmm.
And after what USC basketball has been through, we're not going to go through that again. So we're not getting those. We're not getting those kind of guys, and we're not getting the superstars of coaching. Bill Self and those guys are not coming to USC. Brad Stevens not coming to USC. So what you're talking about is basically dismantling the current program in order to get someone who is marginally better and who probably hasn't been that much more successful than Andy Enfield has, if at all. Right? So,
exactly.
So all I'm saying is, and they're, I'm not saying that if Andy Enfield is replaced, that the person who replaces him can't be successful or that he won't be. Certainly can be. I'm just saying that people are just bad season, fire the coach. You can't just fire your way to just, solving your problems, right? Now, it's a little bit different than in football because football coaching is a lot bigger factor. And when you get cases like Lane Kiffin at USC, you kind of need to fire Lane Kiffin as soon as you can because he's just sort of a cancer, on the program. And you're not at that point when Kiffin was there, USC wasn't that far removed from extraordinary levels of success. So there are situations where you can fire your way to success if you get the right hire. But USC isn't really in this sort of emergency situation where it really must get Jerome Tang or else. So so I think that Andy Enfield, I think he's not going to get fired. He's going to get another chance and maybe even another chance after that because honestly, next season was going to be a rebuilding season no matter what for USC, and it's also the first year in the Big Ten. So, to be honest, he really needs 2 more years after this one. And if he's not getting things done, then he would probably need to go. I'll get off my soapbox.
Don't see it happening, though. Yeah.
You don't see him what?
I don't see that being the case that in 3 years from now he just he's just lost it and then he's let go.
Oh yeah, I don't think that'll happen. I think 3 years from now, in year 2 in the Big Ten, USC is going to be pretty good, and I think there's actual reasons for that. Most of all because the recruiting classes of 25 and 26 are very strong in Southern California, so I suspect USC is going to do very well in the recruiting classes. And I think the cavalry is coming in the next couple of years. It was a pretty good class coming in for next season, but not as good as it was this past season. But as we know, sometimes the recruiting rankings don't always pan out. So getting off my soapbox a bit on that topic. But I do think that until we know who's actually going to be on the roster next year and who's going to be on the roster of some of the teams we're going to play, it's kind of pointless. And it's just really just this huge downer to be talking about, oh, well, next year USC is going to finish last in the Big Ten, right? You don't know, and things are going to change in the months after the season, and then we'll actually have a lot more to go off of. If you want to go off of things after that, then I think you're going to have a lot more credence to what you're saying if you're saying that USC is not going to do very well next year.
Yeah, particularly in basketball. It's a new team every year, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. And one player can make a huge difference. Okay, let's turn our attention to Wednesday and Saturday's games against Cal and Stanford. The Trojans play up at Haas Pavilion at, I think it's 8 p.m., is it?
Yes.
8 p.m.
Yep.
at Haas Pavilion. That'll be on the Pac-12 Network on Wednesday. So that'll be tomorrow night by the time you're hearing this. Cal is one of those teams that I think is much improved. I feel like ever since they brought in their new coach, Mark Madsen, they've really looked like a different team than they have in the past few years when they pretty much have been in the basement of the Pac-12 year in and year out. They don't have a great record, but they have played really well against teams that are pretty good at times. They beat Colorado. They beat Stanford, who is one of the best teams in the conference so far. They beat Arizona State in Tempe. We're talking about Cal going to the desert and splitting. I mean, there was a time when Cal going to the desert, just automatic losses in recent years, right?
They split in LA also.
Yeah, they split on LA. They beat Santa Clara earlier in the year. They beat, as far as common opponents, they beat Cal State Bakersfield as well. And then they beat UCLA. And they beat Washington State at Haas in overtime. So they've beaten some good teams. I'm not going to say they're this great team. They have the exact same record as USC, but they're a little bit better in the conference at 5-6. So when you look at this team, I see a just kind of, they're like a better Oregon State in the sense that it's not showing up in their overall record, but you can't really sleep on them, especially at home.
Yeah, agree. First my eyes and then my numbers. My eyes when Cal played us, I was impressed. They run good offense and they get good shots and they can shoot the ball well. I thought their numbers would be a little more impressive offensively. And granted, that was a pretty, I guess if you're facing that USC team, it can be a fun team to play when you're on offense. So maybe that had something to do with it, although they did well against a good UCLA defense as well that, later that week. So interested to see if that was aberrational. I think they're probably better than my numbers have them offensively. And going to my numbers on defense, this is interesting. Early in the season, they seem to be struggling a lot on defense, but they are actually much better at home than on the road defensively, which is that fact to itself is not really surprising, but they're actually at home. They are as good as your average Pac-12 team, average game grade of 95.2. And that's literally what the average Pac-12 defense does at home. So it's not like we can just, figure to roll the ball out there and have 83 points on the board by the end of the game in Berkeley.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got a star player, emerging star in Jalen Tyson. He's averaging 20 points per game, 7.4 rebounds, 3.3 assists. He is in the running for Pac-12 Player of the Year. And he came from Texas Tech, and before that, Texas. So this is his third school in 3 years, but he finally found the right fit, or at least he found a team that will allow him to get his scoring in. So, and then one thing that's interesting to me is Fardaws Amak. He averages 15 points and 10.6 boards, but I'm not impressed by him at all. I think we handled him pretty well last time. Our bigs did, and if our bigs can handle him well last time, they should be able to do it again this time. But I do worry about stopping Jalen Tyson. I think that this looks like a potential high-scoring game is what I would kind of lean towards. What do you think on the analytics side of things?
Yeah, I would agree with that, except for how good, I guess how I won't say good, how competent, surprisingly competent, might be the best term to describe it. Cal's defense is at home.
Yeah.
And if that's surprising me, I could see maybe a USC team who had a great game and a half, let's say, in the last week, might overlook that defense and just think, we're just going to keep on rolling and just light it up here. And my concern would be maybe they kind of get out of the great habits that they showed Saturday against Oregon State, just with that kind of, that perceived level of opponent, if that makes sense.
Yeah. USC does have one small advantage going into this weekend, which is a very, very small advantage, and it's only an advantage relative to USC's overall advantages that it possesses, which aren't very many and aren't very good. Cal and Stanford are the only teams that USC is playing who they've already beat this year.
Ah.
So if you're looking at mental reasons why the team might not show up, it's not going to be because they don't think they can beat these guys. Right?
Yeah.
To some extent, they might think, I mean, Stanford's having a good year for Stanford, and they're tied for 5th. So they're 6-5, but they're only 2 games out of first. And I don't think anybody thought that Stanford through 11 games would be 2 games out of first place. And they're tied with UCLA, Colorado, and Utah. And then, of course, I don't think anybody had Washington State in second place on their bingo card either. But I do think that for USC, every little bit of mental sort of helps. So the fact that they know that they beat Cal and Stanford, I think gives them a little bit of an edge mentally. Doesn't mean that it's going to result in a victory, because mental edges can quickly melt away when they are met by the reality of the game.
Yeah, I could see that. Just to correct you on one thing, you said nobody expected this from Stanford. I think somebody who co-hosts this podcast with you said, "Hey, Stanford has surprisingly good metrics coming into the conference season."
Oh yeah,
remember that?
Yeah,
I was shakily,
conveniently,
surprisingly high on them.
Conveniently, I don't remember that.
Okay, well, okay.
No, actually,
I'll remember that. Buddy.
No, I do remember. No, they. Well, I guess what I'm saying is like sometimes teams have good metrics, but it doesn't necessarily translate over. Because
I'm just. I believe me, I didn't see any Pac-12 predictions that said, "Hey, Stanford's going to finish, 3rd or 4th."
Yeah.
Nobody had that outside of Palo Alto.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what. Go ahead.
Well, just the thing that sticks out to me from a metric standpoint is this is crazy. I like to clearly use the home road splits. Mm-hmm. In Pac-12 play, there is no offense at home better than the Stanford Cardinal. Average game grade of almost 113.
Wow.
Crazily, they have the worst home defense except for USC. So this could be the game that just gets out of control on the scoreboard, with maybe both teams in well into the 80s.
Well, yeah, it was very much like the one game they did play, which was, I think, USC's it was second highest. The highest point total in conference play this year was the 93-79 victory over Stanford, which until this last game against Oregon State was USC's last victory. It was also the last time, I think, that one of the last times that the team was at full strength. But this Stanford team, the thing is, they're just filled with shooters. I mean, Michael Jones. Yeah. Michael Jones is just a ridiculous shooter. Renaud has played really well recently. He played really well against Arizona. He had 29 points. He was 5 of 6 from 3-point. He's 7'1".
That's gonna drive you nuts if your big man is Ballo, and this guy's out there draining threes. It's a helpless feeling, I think, right?
Yeah. He's 7'1" and he's French, and he still shot five 3-pointers. So
yes. Jones was actually one of those reasons I was really high on Stanford coming in. Just his efficiency was just off the charts. I think his BPO for the season was like in the mid 60s through non-conference play.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, I don't know. Correct me because you're more of an X and O guy, or just you kind of know this part of the game better. Kind of reminds me of maybe like Jackson Shelstead a bit. Just kind of like how he gets to spots and shoots.
Well, maybe from a shooting ability standpoint.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think physically they don't really have anything in common. They're different positions, and they Shelstead is a potential NBA player, I think.
I think maybe from like a shot selection where I don't see Shelstead and I think, boy, that was a bad decision.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, that could be.
Every time he gets the ball, it's like, oh, geez, here we go.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's 10 of his last 18 3-pointers. He had a really nice trip in the desert. He had 5 3-pointers against Arizona, 5 3-pointers against Arizona State.
Yeah.
And some of these were just like long range bombs, right? So they've got a bunch of guys who can shoot 3-pointers. I mean, they're shooting 39% for the season,
Jeez.
which is 10th in the country, right? And get this, in conference play, Stanford is shooting 43.6% from 3-point land.
Oh my gosh.
Which is
How is that possible?
Which is insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
Which of course is first in the conference, and they're only giving up 34.1 in conference play from 3, which is 3rd in the conference. So they're doing pretty good at preventing other teams from scoring from 3-point land. So
because they practice against an awesome shooting team every day.
Great point.
That 43.6%, this is nuts. I think UCLA on the whole season from the floor, 2 and 3-pointers is shooting just 44.1%.
Yeah.
Not much better than that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the only kind of thing besides the fact that USC knows they can beat Stanford, although it might not have Isaiah Collier in this game like it did last game, and he was a really big factor in USC's win. I think that USC probably has a bit of an athletic advantage against Stanford, which has kind of always been the case when they play. So sometimes USC, even when Stanford's really good, USC has always been able to kind of play tough just because of the athletic factor. So that could be a factor in this game. But overall, I think these are both games that USC is more likely than not to lose. Although if USC does get Collier back, it could make a difference.
Yeah. One thing, just kind of a weird note. I don't know if you've noticed this too. Stanford coach Haas, this is my point, played at Cal.
With Jason Kidd, and
with Jason
Lamar
Kidd.
Murray, he was on a very good Cal team.
The Cal coach played at Stanford. Don't know how that works out. And then to almost make this complete, you have Troy Taylor, the Stanford coach, played football at Cal. We just need Cal to fire Wilcox. I don't know, I don't know who they would.
They'd have to bring in
David Shaw,
John Elway, or
David Shaw. He played there.
Oh, that's right, he did play there.
Yeah,
that would be amazing. That would be
how weird is that?
That would be some great trivia right there. Can we just do it for the trivia?
Yeah, just
like
buyouts. Nobody cares. Just it's worth the trivia.
That'd be a really funny press conference where they're like, "So, David Shaw, why did you take the Cal head coaching job?" And he's like, "Well, if you look at Cal basketball, they're coached by Mark Madsen. And if you look at Stanford basketball, they're coached by Jared Haas. And if you look at Stanford football, they're coached by Troy Taylor. So I'm a big fan of trivia, and
I'm a big trivia guy.
a big fan of trivia. So I thought it'd be really cool if a Stanford player was also the coach at Cal.
I like Shaw, and I think he would have given me the proper recognition. I'm sure the answer would have started with, well, as Buck Metrics pointed out so ably on the podcast.
That kind of little trivia question or stat is the kind of thing that could make a career.
For David Shaw?
No, for the person who comes up with it.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I'll be on ESPN with the Bear, who's now with Fox now.
No, don't. What'll happen is ESPN will take it and steal it and not credit anybody.
Yeah.
That's what they're known for doing. Okay, so we looked at Cal and Stanford. I think it's going to be tough, some tough games. Although if USC does well in those games, at least plays well and keeps developing the players that have been developing, I think they can come away with some positives, if not necessarily victories. This could be sort of a continuation of potentially of this Oregon State win. If USC can build off that win and get a couple wins here on the road, which is a lot to ask for because even good USC basketball teams probably split on this trip potentially in recent years. I think in recent years they've maybe swept half the time and split half the time is what I would say. Like during this good run by Enfield, that they've generally it's either because sometimes both of the teams are really bad and USC just is but because I remember if you go back to the teams that beat the Stanford team that beat USC up there on the last second shot by Davis, and then on the half court shot. Remember they beat McLaughlin and SC.
My wife remembers that. Yeah, that's how bad that one was.
Up there at Maples, and then there's just been a couple other times. Cal, I think, has had a lot more trouble beating USC up there, but I know Stanford has every once in a while been able to do that. So USC, I think, it's just a real tough task for them, especially when they're not that good, to be able to sweep. So, we'll see what happens as usual. And do you have anything else you want to add, Mark, besides the suggestion of the USC slogan?
No, just as we say, bear in mind this is not the Viking Jones Cow Bears. So put on your seatbelt for this one. This could be a little tougher than you expect.
I know. The Dirty Golden Bears can be awfully tough at Hospitalian.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Dunk City Podcast. Thanks for listening. We will be back next week when USC comes back home to Galen and will take on, I think, the Mountain Schools, Utah and Colorado. Until then, I'm Chris, and that is Mark, and fight on.
Fight on, everyone.